I just want to say briefly, I've been in since 2019, so I'm like bottom of the knowledge tree. And it seems to me that most of the change happens very quietly in those committees and report stage rather than those big set piece votes. You might think the votes are quite interesting, but a lot of the radical changes happen. But my impression in the last year with the new Labour government is there's been less appetite for some of those quieter changes, but maybe that's just my impression. Lord Anderson.
Sometimes I talk to primary schools with Learn with the Lords, and the way I try and explain the difference between the Commons and the Lords is that the House of Commons are like your parents. You know, they set the rules when you have to go to bed, who you can play with and all the rest of it. But if you're very lucky, you might have grandparents somewhere on the scene as well, and grandparents have great advantages. They're a bit older, they probably know about a few things that perhaps your parents don't know about, and above all, they have a bit more time. And I think almost more important than who we are is the fact that when a bill comes to us from the Commons, we just have a bit longer to think about it. And in answer to the question from Liverpool about a specific example, I think back to the National Security Act 2023, where inserted at a very late stage as the bill went through the Commons, really without any chance for a substantive debate, was a huge new part of the bill introducing what they called a foreign influence registration scheme, which basically said if you wanted to talk to the government on behalf of somebody abroad, then you had to register your interest on a public register and jump through all sorts of bureaucratic hoops. Now, it's not that we're particularly brilliant people in the Lords, but the bill sat in front of us for a while, and people started coming out of the woodwork. The City of London said, well, look, hang on, this means if a Danish company wants to build a wind farm, on the Dogger Bank, and it wants a confidential discussion with the government about its tax position, it's going to have to declare what it's doing on a public register. And then the international NGOs came in and said, well, we often lobby the British government on how it ought to spend its aid money, for example, in Africa. We can't do that under the glare of publicity. And this sort of snowballed to the point where some of us were actually able to go and see the government and say, well, look, this doesn't seem to have been thought about as carefully as it should have been. Can't you think again? And the minister, to his great credit, I'll give him credit now, he's called Tom Tugendhat, and he was a Conservative. He didn't listen to his civil servants saying nothing to see here. He actually sat down and grappled with it and came back with something that was substantially different and I would say much better. So you asked for one example, that would be mine.
Thank you. Baroness Butler-Sloss.
I'm not sure about better acts of Parliament, but one of the things that the House of Lords does, it gives the government the opportunity to put in an enormous number of amendments. And I've been watching 2 or 3 bills, I forget particularly which, where group after group of a marshalled list of amendments are government amendments, because they thought again between what they did in the Commons to the Lords. And so that's where we're so useful, is allowing the government itself to rethink. And also, a little like Lord Anderson, I do go from time to talk privately to ministers and say, could you look at this and see? And just occasionally, and if you get 5% of what you want, you've done quite well.
A very quick, direct answer. Pick up today's newspaper. The headline is the government has conceded on the Employment Rights Bill. Yeah. They lost with a huge majority in the House of Lords on day one rights, not just my party, but Crossbench's Lib Dems. If we hadn't done that, they would not have changed the law. So that is an example you can read about today of the House of Lords amending legislation.
Yeah. And for those of you who are studying at the moment, the 900 amendments to the Assisted Dying Bill, I think, demonstrate quite an interesting role that the House of Lords will play in improving that legislation. Whatever one thinks about the debate and discussion, there is a very serious attempt to engage with that piece of legislation and improve it in a way that the Commons just simply don't have time to give it that kind of level of scrutiny.